Inflation is cooling. That's the official narrative. The data prints look better. Central banks signal control. Commentators talk about stabilization as if the emergency phase has passed. Institutions like the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England communicate confidence. Policy tightening worked. The system absorbed the shock. And on paper, that's true. But here's the part no one says out loud. Cooling inflation doesn't mean your financial life goes back to where it was. It means the new, higher baseline has been accepted. If you're between 25 and 45, educated, earning a solid income, doing what you were told, building a career, investing, staying out of bad debt, and you still feel financially tight, this is the gap you're feeling. Not a crisis, a reset. Groceries didn't return to 2021 levels. Insurance premiums didn't reverse. Rent didn't politely decline. The monthly burn rate of your household simply shifted upward and stayed there. Inflation slowed, your cost structure didn't. And that's the key distinction. Slower acceleration is not reversal. If inflation ran hot for 2 years and then cooled, the damage compounds forward. If prices rose 9%, then 6%, then 3%, that's not 3%. That's a permanent repricing of your lifestyle. Your psychological baseline moved, quietly. Your salary might have increased 5 or 8%, but your expense stack rose more, which means your profit margin, the gap between what you earn and what you keep, compressed. And most people misdiagnose this as a personal failure. They think they need to hustle harder, optimize coffee spending, cancel one more subscription. But this isn't about lattes. It's about structural math. Let's zoom out. You are told that rising wages and 4 to 5% savings yields mean things are improving. And technically, that's correct. But real return is what matters. If your cash earns 4% and your real cost of living rises 5 or 6%, you are still losing purchasing power, just more politely. It feels stable. It's not. This is how erosion works in advanced economies. Not through collapse, through normalization. You normalize $7 coffee. You normalize $300 grocery runs. You normalize $2,000 for rent for an average apartment. Over time, your identity adjusts. You stop comparing to 3 years ago. You compare to last month. That shift in reference point is where wealth quietly leaks. On Nick Finance, we don't chase dramatic headlines. We analyze structural positioning. Because if the baseline has moved, your strategy has to move with it. Let's talk about the silent wealth drain first, the psychological layer. Lifestyle creep used to be associated with promotions and bonuses. Now it's embedded in inflation. What feels like maintaining your standard is often just absorbing systemic price expansion. Subscription creep compounds this. Software, streaming, convenience services, small recurring charges that feel negligible individually but meaningful collectively. Not because they're evil, but because they reduce optionality. Optionality is the real asset. Cash positioning becomes critical in this environment. Not because cash is exciting, it isn't, but because liquidity gives you strategic patience. When rates are elevated, the spread between traditional banks and competitive high-yield vehicles widens. The difference between 0.5% and 4 to 5% annually isn't flashy, but over 6 figures, it's measurable. Liquidity is not about hoarding. It's about having capital ready for intelligent deployment when asymmetry appears. That leads to the second layer, ownership. Broad index exposure historically outpaced inflation over long horizons because businesses adjust. They raise prices, they innovate, they expand margins. Firms like Vanguard and BlackRock built scale around this principle. Own productive systems, not just currency. The concept is simple but powerful. Nominal growth minus inflation equals real trajectory. Your focus shouldn't be, did my portfolio go up? It should be, did my purchasing power compound? That's a different question, and a more honest one. But even investing is secondary to a more uncomfortable truth. In an inflation reset world, income expansion often matters more than expense optimization. There is a ceiling to how much you can cut. There is far less ceiling on how intelligently you can expand earning capacity. AI tools, remote leverage, cross-border contracts, skill stacking, these aren't hustle cliches, they are structural levers. When you convert specialized labor into scalable outputs, you increase margin. When you increase margin, you accelerate optionality. The goal isn't to look wealthy, it's to widen the gap between what you earn and what you require. That gap buys autonomy. Now, consider fixed-rate debt. In inflationary environments, fixed obligations behave differently. If your mortgage is fixed at a lower rate and wages rise gradually over time, the real burden of that debt declines. Inflation can erode liabilities just as it erodes savings, depending on positioning. The instrument isn't inherently good or bad, structure determines outcome. Finally, asset resilience. Equities represent claims on real businesses. Real assets, property, infrastructure, tend to reprice with currency debasement over time. Select commodity exposure historically correlates with inflation spikes. The unifying principle isn't chasing returns, it's owning things that adjust rather than decay. Here's the deeper point. Inflation didn't just raise prices, it changed your financial identity. It tested whether you think like a consumer or like a capital allocator. Consumers absorb higher prices and adapt. Capital allocators adjust deployment. If you feel behind despite everything doing right, it may not be a discipline problem. It may be a positioning problem. The rules shifted. The baseline moved. The question is whether your strategy moved too. On Nick Finance, the focus is simple. Build systems that convert income into freedom, protect margin, increase leverage thoughtfully, preserve optionality, compound real purchasing power over decades, not quarters. No urgency, no hype, just trajectory. Inflation doesn't destroy wealth overnight. It erodes it quietly, while convincing competent people that feeling constrained is normal. It's not. The people who stay ahead in 2026 and beyond won't be the loudest. They'll be the most structurally aligned. Calm, liquid, diversified, expanding income capacity, focused on real returns, not optics. If this conversation felt slightly uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you're thinking in systems, not headlines. The baseline has already reset. The only question left is whether your identity and your strategy will reset with it.